When I heard that thick, sucking sound out in the marsh, my breath froze in my chest because I knew this wasn't a fish stirring the water, and it sure wasn't one of my nets snapping back. Somebody out there was calling for help, and they were sinking fast. It was still the silver edge of dawn. Mist rolled low, clinging to the reeds the way quiet clings to an empty church. I'd shuffled down the dock barefoot like I always do, half asleep, half praying the crabs hadn't chewed through my lines overnight. A gull croaked once, then even he went silent, as though nature herself was holding her tongue. Then came that faint cry, a wet, broken, swallowed by the fog. My first thought was a raccoon caught in a crayfish trap. Second thought, maybe a young buck mired in the mudflats. I grabbed my old 12-gauge anyway, more out of habit than bravery, and followed the sound into the sawgrass. Another slurp, another muffled groan. My heart hammered like it wanted out of my ribs. The marsh smelled of rotten eggs and cold iron. Every step felt borrowed from a nightmare. I parted a veil of cattails, and there he stood. A wild boar. Big as a refrigerator, bristle black, but for a white scar across his snout. He was crouched on the very rim of a peat sink, shoulders heaving, hooves slick with muck. And he wasn't running from me. He wasn't even looking at me. He was staring straight down into the hole where that desperate cry kept bubbling up. For a heartbeat, my legs locked. Boars kill people down here. They gore first and wonder later. Instinct barked, back up, old man. Back up slow. But something in the way that animal moved, jerky, frantic, almost pleading, made me stay. He plunged his snout into the sludge, grunted, backed out, tried again. Each time he yanked upward, a chunk of sod came free, but whatever lay beneath stayed stuck. The pig snapped his jaws, frustrated, and let out a roar so raw it rattled my fillings. Then the sound I'll never forget. A human moan, thin as fishing line, winding up through the mud. A man was down there. My spine went numb. Still the boar ignored me. He slid one hoof forward, almost toppled in, then braced and tried to dig with a foreleg, flinging clods behind him. I saw a sleeve blue denim, soaked black, surface for a blink before sinking again. The pig lunged, caught that cloth in his tusks, and pulled with every ounce of muscle the Lord had given him. He ain't looking at me, I whispered, too shocked to shout. He's looking at what's got his heart deeper than any man with a gun ever could. He wasn't looking at me. He kept staring down at something that mattered to him more than a man with a shotgun. Time broke loose inside my skull. I crashed through the reeds, dropped the gun, and threw myself flat on the bank beside him. The earth quivered under the boar's weight. His hot breath steamed against my ear, but he didn't snap, didn't shy. He tugged. I grabbed the man's wrist, slick, cold, and frighteningly limp, and together, beast and I, we hauled. The mud fought back like a jealous lover. A boot surfaced, then a knee. The boar braced, muscles bunching. I dug my heels, feeling the peat suck at my ankles. One last heave, something tore, the earth belched, and the man slid out onto the grass, coughing black water. For a second none of us moved. The stranger gasped like a newborn. I could feel his pulse stuttering under my fingers. The boar towered over him, chest heaving, eyes wild, not with rage, but with an urgency I can only call human. Then, as if a switch flipped, the animal backed up 3 careful steps and sat. Sat like an old dog guarding a child's crib. That was the moment my knees gave out. I dropped beside the man, shouted into the fog for help that might never come, and looked the boar full in the face. Up close his tusks were chipped, his ears ragged from 100 fights, but his eyes, God help me, his eyes held something like relief. As though he'd been afraid no one else would hear that drowning voice. I thought, he's done his part. Now he'll charge me or bolt into the brush, and this will all end in blood or in disbelief. I thought that was the end of it, that nature had shown her hand and would fade back into the myth she came from. But the marsh had another twist waiting for me, and it would change everything I believed about wild things. I kept yelling, half to scare the hog off, half to keep my own courage from slipping away. Go on now. My voice cracked, but the boar didn't budge. He only shifted one heavy step back, lifted his head, and locked those dark eyes on mine. No snarl, no flare of rage, just a hard, waiting stare, like a man at a crossroads who needs you to hurry up and choose. That was when the truth stabbed through the fog. Somebody was trapped down there, and the animal knew it better than I did. I edged closer, boots squelching. The sinkhole gurgled, thick as tar. A pale shape glimmered beneath the surface. My stomach flipped, an arm. Mud painted it the color of old coffee grounds. The hand twitched once, then slipped deeper. The stranger's face bobbed up next, coated in slime, eyes fluttering like moth wings. He gasped a breath that sounded more like a rattle. Fear slapped me first, raw, electric. A man drowning within reach and a tusked brute beside him? Wrong place, wrong morning. Then the shock hit, this hog ain't leaving. He was still there because he wanted something done. And right behind the shock came a rush of gratitude so strong it almost buckled my knees. I wasn't alone against the swamp itself had sent me help. The boar thrust forward again, clamping his jaws on the back of the kid's denim jacket. He heaved, rear legs digging trenches in the peat. The fabric ripped with a sound like splitting canvas. I lurched in, grabbed the man by the belt with one hand, the shoulder seam with the other, and yanked in time with the boar's next pull. Mud frothed over my wrists, cold and stinging. The kid slid an inch, then another. The hole sucked harder. I lost footing, dropped to one knee, and for a heartbeat thought we'd both be hauled under. The hog braced sideways, throwing his weight against the suction exactly when I did. It felt like wrestling alongside some giant farmhand who understood every grunt I made before I made it. Little by little the stranger's torso rose, sludge sloughing away to reveal a college-age kid in a soaked plaid shirt, freckles lost under the grime. "Hang on, son," I muttered, not sure if he could hear. His eyelids flickered, a thin moan seeped out. Final surge, we hauled him clear, collapsing backward onto a hummock of ragweed. The boar let go, wheezed, and stepped aside, legs trembling. Steam poured off his hide in the cold dawn. I leaned over the kid, 2 fingers at his neck. Weak pulse, but it was there. Chest barely lifting. Alive. That's when the moment carved itself into my bones. I looked up and the boar was standing next to us, shoulders heaving, ribs pumping like bellows. His head hung low and those small eyes stayed fixed on the boy's face, not mine. In their shine was something I have no better word for than worry. I saw the boar standing beside him, breathing hard as if he was afraid we wouldn't make it in time. I fumbled my phone out, cursing the mud on the screen, and stabbed at 911. Signal danced in and out, each bar winking like a cruel firefly. Through it all, the animal never flinched, never shuffled to charge or to flee. He simply listened to the gurgle of the victim's breaths the way a mother listens to a sick child. A shaky connection clicked through. I spit coordinates, voice shaking, begged them to send an airboat. The dispatcher kept asking me to repeat and spell the Bayou Road. I kept one eye on the hog, ready for him to lose patience. But he didn't. He just sank back on his haunches, nostrils quivering, waiting. Minutes crawled. I ripped my jacket off, balled it under the kid's head, tried to brush muck out of his mouth. Each time I moved, the boar's ears twitched, but he held his ground like some grim guardian statue carved out of living muscle. And then, not sure why, I reached out and laid a muddy hand on the boar's shoulder. The bristles were coarse, warm, trembling beneath the skin. He didn't jerk away. For a breath we just existed there, a broken old fisherman, a half-dead stranger, and a creature most folks call vermin stitched together by something none of us could name. Far off, an engine coughed, a rescue coming at last. Tires over planks, voices shouting. The boar's head jerked toward the sound. He sniffed, gave one forlorn grunt, and backed into the reeds, vanishing before the first flashlight beam sliced the mist. I thought he'd just leave after that. I figured the wild always retreats once the human world shows up with sirens and stretchers. I couldn't have guessed that was only the start and that the marsh had another secret waiting, one that would chase sleep from my nights for years to come. I stabbed at my phone again, nothing but one shivering bar that blinked away whenever the wind shifted. Come on, I hissed, wiping swamp scum off the screen with the back of my hand. The boy at my feet wheezed like an accordion starved of air. And the boar just sat there beside him, chest rising and falling in slow, deliberate drags as if he'd settled in for an all-night vigil. No huffing, no stomping, no threat. Just waiting. I tried a different angle, climbed a hummock for a few inches of height, still garbled static. I could taste panic in the back of my throat. Every rule I'd ever learned about wild hogs said turn tail when you can. But leaving that kid alone with the swamp, even with this half-tamed guardian, felt wrong in a way my bones wouldn't allow. So I went back down and knelt again. The hog's ears twitched at my approach, but he didn't flinch. I reached out, slow as prayer, and let him sniff my fingers. He drew one long breath in, the wet leather of his nose brushing my knuckles, then released it like a weary sigh. There was no anger in him, only a strange, measured assurance. Go on, those tiny dark eyes seemed to say. Finish what you started. Fear cracked and slid away, replaced by a respect so sharp it left me lightheaded. I'd grown up hunting these creatures, knowing them as reckless, mean. Yet here was a brute who guarded a stranger the way a hound guards its master's boots. The world tilted, nothing felt certain except the boy's pulse fluttering under my thumb and the beast's broad flank pressed close enough to warm the damp air between us. The kid coughed, spitting mud. I tilted his head, cleared his mouth. The hog edged nearer, shoulder nudging my knee as if urging, keep going. His coarse hide scraped my jeans. It wasn't gentle, but it was oddly encouraging. I spoke without thinking. I'm trying, big fella, I'm trying. Hearing my own voice steadied me. Somewhere across the water a motor sputtered awake, the search and rescue John boat. Relief surged so hard I laughed, a cracked, breathless sound. The boar's head turned toward the noise, nostrils flaring, but he didn't stir. He just sat straighter, almost proud, eyes fixed on the boy. Minutes later the aluminum hull clanged against the cypress roots. Flashlights speared the mist. Over here, I bellowed. 2 EMTs and a deputy splashed up the bank, radios crackling, life vests squeaking. Their beams froze when they saw the hog. Sir, move away from the animal, the deputy barked, hand drifting toward his sidearm. He's not the danger, I shot back. The kid is. The boar rose but only backed up 3 slow steps, hooves suctioning in the mud. He didn't charge, didn't vanish. He simply took a guard post at the edge of the clearing and watched. Watched the medics kneel, slap a mask over the boy's face, check pupils with a pen light. Watched the deputy call in coordinates. Watched them strap the limp body to a board, mud dripping like candle wax off his boots. When the rescuers arrived, he stepped back, but he didn't run. He just watched them take the boy away as if making sure everything was truly all right. The EMTs carried the stretcher toward the boat. The hog's gaze followed every inch. His breathing slowed, almost peaceful now that the burden was off his shoulders. I found myself whispering, he's safe. You did it. Silly thing to say to a creature that couldn't understand English, except part of me was certain he did. The stretcher clattered onto the deck, the motor revved. Spray hissed behind the prop. I expected the boar to vanish into the reeds then, but he lingered, shoulders easing only when the boat's red top light faded into the fog. Silence rushed in, thick and humming. I bent to grab my forgotten shotgun, mud-caked, useless, then looked back. The boar met my stare one last time. Something passed between us, a quiet pact sealed without words. He turned, muscles rippling under the moon-pale bristles, and melted into the cattails, leaving nothing but quivering stalks in his wake. I stood alone, heart drumming, unsure whether to laugh, cry, or drop to my knees. The marsh smelled different now, less like decay, more like possibility. A breeze rippled across the flats, and in it I heard the smallest echo of that hog's steady breathing. I figured that was the end of the miracle, that nature had closed her ledger and balanced the account. But dawn was still hours off, and the bayou isn't known for letting debts rest unpaid, not when there's one more truth waiting to break a man wide open. The rescue boat's engine faded until it was just another hush in the night. Red strobes vanished beyond the cypress, carrying that boy toward doctors and bright lights. I should have followed, file a report, answer questions, do the sensible civilized thing, but my boots stayed sunk to the ankles in mud, nailed there by something older than sense. The boar was still here. He stood at the edge of the sinkhole, shoulder to shoulder with the dark, staring down into the churned-up muck as if the ground itself could replay what we just lived through. Fog draped his spine, moonlight silvered the wet bristles along his flanks. He didn't grunt, didn't scratch, didn't so much as flick an ear. He simply watched the place where a life had almost ended. I cleared my throat. "It's over now, partner," I said, the way a man might speak to another man after a graveside prayer. The words sounded foolish hanging in the reeds, but they were all I had. "You did good." He angled his head, one eye catching mine. There was no flash of wildness, no warning. Only that same stern, weary patience I'd seen when he refused to run. It pinned me harder than any tusk could have. I thought of stepping back, of letting nature reclaim her mystery, but each time my heel lifted, something hitched behind my ribs. A tug, faint but impossible to ignore. The same tug that makes a compass needle quiver north. I took another breath of marsh air and felt it settle certain. I am not done here. So instead of leaving, I trudged closer, just 2 careful steps. The boar didn't retreat. He turned away from the hole and faced me proper, then lowered himself, front knees first, rear haunches folding, until he lay in the grass like a farmhouse dog easing onto the porch boards after supper. The breath I'd been holding tumbled out of me in a shaky half-laugh. "Well, ain't you full of surprises?" I murmured. Moonlight swept across his face. The scar on his snout glowed pale, a jagged crescent. My chest tightened. There was a hoglet I once freed from a snare 20-odd years back. Left a matching cut when the wire snapped. My mind tried to shake the notion away, but my heart clenched around it like a secret it had been hunting for years. Something warm pooled behind my eyes. I lowered myself a few yards away and sat cross-legged, shotgun across my lap but forgotten. The night pressed close, thick with mud scent and magnolia. No crickets sang, no frogs chimed. Only the distant slap of water against cypress knees. Minutes drifted. The boar's breathing evened into a slow, rolling rhythm. I followed each rise and fall, letting it stitch my own pulse into calm. Out here, two creatures who should have feared each other shared a hush that city folk would pay fortunes to feel. After a while I spoke again, voice low. "You know, folks won't believe a lick of this. They'll say I'm touched or drunk." The hog twitched one ear, as though half offended I'd doubt what we'd both seen. "Doesn't matter," I went on. "I believe it, and I reckon that's enough." A cloud slid past the moon. The clearing dimmed. The boar's outline merged with shadow until he was more idea than animal. A silent oath carved out of dark. My breath slowed to match his, and in that steady cadence another truth slipped in. Somewhere along the line, the swamp had flipped the script. I came here thinking I was caretaker of nets and catch. Turns out the marsh already had a caretaker, and he wore bristles instead of badges. He looked at me like an old friend I'd forgotten I had, and the weight of that gaze squeezed tears I didn't know I carried. Wind rustled the cattails. Instinct nagged. "Get home before dawn, old man." I pushed to my feet. Mud popped around my boots. "I should go," I told him. He didn't stir. I took 3 steps toward the trail, then glanced back, and felt that compass tug snap taut again. Couldn't leave him there, not yet. So I turned around, came back, and lowered myself beside him once more. We sat like that, 2 silhouettes stitched to the earth, until the moon dipped and purple seeped into the eastern haze. Only then did the boar rise, stretch slow, and give a grunt so soft it felt like goodbye. He took a single pace toward the tree line, and stopped, waiting, as if granting me the final choice. My throat closed. "Go on," I whispered. "I'll be all right." The words tasted like surrender and blessing all at once. He walked into the reeds without hurry, each step parting stalks with a sigh. When the last ripple of grass had stilled, the marsh exhaled, and I realized I'd been holding my breath for hours. I figured that would be the moment he vanished for good, back into whatever legend had birthed him. I reckoned wrong. The bayou wasn't done rewriting everything I thought I knew about debt and memory and the strange, fierce kindness that lives under a swine's hide. Dawn bled over the bayou in slow, lavender streaks, but I still hadn't moved from that spit of ground. My legs were numb, my mind raw, yet a strange warmth floated in my chest, half shock, half something holier. I watched the place where the boar had disappeared, and a memory, long buried under years of fish guts and bills, clawed its way up. I was 22, fresh home from the service, stubborn as a cypress root. One spring morning I found a squealing piglet caught in a barbed wire snare someone had set for coons. The little thing thrashed itself bloody, eyes wild with terror. I should have left it. Everyone told me hogs were pests, but something about that frantic heartbeat fit my palm like a promise. I cut the wire, packed mud on the cut to stop the bleeding, and let the piglet totter off. I never told a soul. Seemed too small a deed to brag on. For years afterward, Every hog track I saw in these parts carried a sliver of that morning, though I buried the feeling beneath work and weather. Now, kneeling here in this same stretch of marsh, the old scene replayed bright as sunrise, and a whisper slid down my spine. What if it's him? Ridiculous. Boars don't remember men. 20-plus seasons of hurricanes, hunters, and lean winters lie between a half-grown shote and the mountain of muscle that pulled a stranger from death. Yet the scar, white and jagged in the same place where barbed wire bit that piglet, wouldn't leave my mind. Coincidence, my brain insisted. Fate, my heartbeat answered. A soft rustle snapped me back. Reeds parted and the boar emerged again, moon-pale bristles gilded now by sunrise gold. He walked straight toward me, deliberate, unstoppable as tidewater. I should have stood, backed up, shown respect or fear. Instead I stayed rooted like a child waiting for a verdict he can't predict. He halted a yard away. Steam curled from his nostrils. Our eyes met over the mud-scarred ground, and in that silent gaze the bayou itself seemed to hush. There was no challenge there, no wild glitter. Only a depth that reached past instinct into something I'd once thought belonged to people alone. In his eyes was something I know I will carry to my grave. It was gratitude. A tremor rippled through me. Knees shook, breath fluttered, heart hammered as if trying to carve an answer in my ribs. This can't be real, thought clanged. But you just saw it, soul replied. I whispered, was it you, boy? That little fella I let go? My throat burned. The boar flicked one ear, then slow as moss, waved his head side to side, emotion so close to a knot it shattered the last wall of disbelief. Tears I didn't approve of spilled warm down my cheeks. I laughed, choked, wiped grime across my face, made a mess of everything, and still the beast watched with a patience gentler than any sermon I've heard. The sun crested the pines. Light pooled on his scar, turning it to molten copper. I saw it clear now. The world had looped a thread between two beings most folks say should hate each other and tied it so tight neither distance nor years could fray it. The marsh, it seemed, keeps receipts. Words stumbled out before I knew what I meant to say. Thank you for coming back, for saving that boy, for showing me I'm not alone in owing debts. The boar's ears relaxed. A rumble blossomed low in his chest, not a growl, more a purr run through a gravel chute. It rolled over me like warm tidewater, and for one fragile breath I believed creation itself might be listening. My pulse pounded so loud I could feel it in my fingertips. If anybody had walked up right then, old buddies, wildlife wardens, the governor himself, I'd have grabbed them by the shoulders and shouted the truth. We are seen by what we call wild, and sometimes, if we're blessed, we are remembered. A gust stirred the cattails. The boar looked toward the treeline, time to go. He shifted his weight, but before turning, he dipped his head once, deliberate, deeper than any salute. My vision blurred again. I blinked, the tears clear, and the boar was already retreating, merging with the dawn haze until he was nothing but the echo of hooves in wet earth. Silence settled, thick, reverent. I pressed a palm to the ground, half expecting to feel the heartbeat of the bayou itself. Impossible? Maybe. But I saw it. I felt it. And from this day on, no sunrise over these waters will ever look ordinary again. I went back at first light, boots still caked from the night before, heart humming with impossible hope. The marsh looked untouched, cattails bending in slow prayer, fog curling low over the sinkhole that had almost become a grave. I stood there a long while, waiting for a ripple of bristles or the grunt that had already carved itself into my dreams. Nothing. Just wind and water and my own pulse. Loss hit hard, sharp as winter eelgrass. Yet beneath it ran a strange fullness, a peace like warm river mud between bare toes. I wasn't afraid of this place anymore, not of the shadows, not of what they hide. The bayou had shown me its fiercest face and its gentlest in one breath, and somehow that made every hush feel like welcome. Back in town the story spilled out of me the way a net spills mullet on a dock, messy, urgent, undeniable. The bait shop boys chuckled behind their chew, called it a swamp dream brewed from cheap whiskey. The deputy who'd drawn his sidearm said he must have misremembered the distance. Folks nodded, relief softening their eyes, easier to believe the old man had cracked than to rewrite the law of tooth and tusk. Only one voice backed mine, the young fellow we pulled out, pale but smiling under hospital sheets. When I visited, he gripped my wrist with mud-scarred fingers and whispered, I saw him, big red face in the fog, thought I was hallucinating. Those words lit a hearth in my chest nothing could dim. Walking home that evening, I noticed things I'd never truly seen. A heron tracked my stride along the shoreline, head tilting as though weighing my worth. A pair of otters surfaced, stared a heartbeat longer than curiosity allows, then slipped away in perfect silence. Even the mosquitoes seemed to hover at arm's length, undecided. It struck me then, animals look at us the way mirrors never do. They measure the noise inside, the kindness we forget we carry, the debts we have yet to pay. A year ago, I walked these banks certain I ranked above the wild by virtue of thumbs and talk. Now every set of watching eyes felt like an invitation to earn my place. Loneliness washed over me, crisp and cold, then rolled back, leaving a tideline of connection so wide I could rest inside it. Peace followed on quiet feet. That night, porch boards creaked beneath my rocker, cicadas drummed like far-off rain. I thought of the boar where he bedded down, whether he felt the same hush I did. I pictured him nose deep in acorns, sun on his scar, and the thought seeded comfort instead of longing. Some meetings, I realized, aren't meant to be repeated. They're stitched once into a man's marrow and left to glow there, steady as lighthouse coal. Friends kept asking why I smiled at nothing, why I hummed between stories, why the rifle stayed hanging over the mantel untouched. I told them the marsh had changed flavors, and if they wanted to taste it, they'd have to come listen for themselves. Most shook their heads. A few followed me out, boots crunching, curiosity poking through disbelief. None of them saw the boar, but every single one stepped lighter on the way back, as though afraid to bruise the place. Weeks passed. Headlines moved on, the boy healed, summer rolled into the heavy breath of August. My tale settled into rumor, one more bayou yarn told at dusk. Yet some evenings, when the sky purples and the wind hushes, I catch a scent of warm earth and remember the weight of bristles against my knee. My chest swells until it almost hurts, and I whisper thanks into the dark. People think miracles crash loud like thunder. I've learned they sometimes sit beside you in quiet mud, share your labor, and vanish before sunrise, leaving only the echo of their patience inside your ribs. I used to walk these banks hunting proof that the world was mine to master. Now I walk them listening for a breath that isn't human, ready to answer when it calls. The wild hasn't changed. I have. And the change tastes sweet like well water after a season of salt. I'll keep the porch light low, the door unlatched, in case another impossible debt comes looking for payment. Until then I'll rock and watch and carry that meeting like a warm coal under my tongue, a secret beacon for whatever kindness still prowls the shadows. Because once a creature of the swamp looks at you and sees something worth saving, you can't help but try to become the man he already thought you were. Some evenings, when the heat slips off the pines and the frogs strike up their ragged choir, I take the long path to the bayou just to sit where mud met miracle. I bring no rifle, no nets, only a tin cup of coffee and the hush inside my chest. Folks ask why an old fisherman wastes time watching fog. They don't feel what I feel, a steady gaze pressing through the cattails, gentle as a hand on the shoulder. Every step toward that water tells me somebody's keeping score of my footprints. The first months after the rescue, I fought the feeling, turned quick, swung a flashlight, tried to catch eyes glinting back. Nothing. But the sense never faded. It rode the air like the sweet rot of lilies, telling me I was not alone on those banks. In place of fear, it planted a strange comfort. If I stumbled, if the swamp ever decided to take me, something out there would notice. So I made a habit of it. Sunset, thermos, rocking on a cypress root while Minos stitched rings around my boots. No baited lines, no hunt. Just waiting. Most nights delivered nothing but wind and mosquito hum. Some brought curious raccoons, a heron angry at my stillness, the distant slap of a gator's tail. Yet behind every ordinary rustle lay the same quiet certainty, he's near. One gray dawn, thick with gulf mist, the air changed. I felt it first in my lungs, like breathing through wool. The coffee stayed untouched, my hands forgot the cup existed. Across the shallows a shape gathered, broad, low, edged by bristle. Not moving forward, not backing off. Simply standing where fog folds into itself. Heart thudded once, hard. I didn't rise. Didn't speak. The shape remained solid, anchored, but blurred as memory. I knew those lines even through the blur. The scarred ridge of a snout, the slope of shoulders built to uproot stumps. Distance between us hardly 20 yards, yet it felt wide as a life. Minutes passed, could have been 10, could have been 1. Cicadas clicked, then fell silent as if the whole marsh held its breath. My throat worked, but the words jammed behind caution and awe. Finally, I pushed them out soft, shaking. The silhouette didn't flinch. Mist coiled around him like slow smoke, hiding and revealing by turns the way truth hides inside a man's days and only shows when his heart stops blinking. He gave no grunt, no stomp. Just waited, the same patience that held that boy's life above the mire months ago. A wave of gratitude rolled through me so fierce my eyes burned. I wanted to bridge the distance, lay a hand on that scar, prove to skin and bone that the world can keep a promise across decades. But I stayed put. Some distances are holy, meant to be honored, not crossed. Instead I spoke again, voice steadier. You did more than save a life, friend. You saved the part of me that quit believing men and beasts still share ground. Wind rattled cane grass, an answer or maybe just wind. The silhouette remained. I told him about the boy, now walking without crutches. How he plans to plant trees along the levee because nature gave me one. I told him the deputy quit trapping hogs for sport. Swears the marsh deserves respect. I even confessed the guilt that chews me when I remember younger hunts. How quick I was to pull a trigger on any back bristled and rooting. Words spilled like creek water after rain, and the fog listened. At last the shape lifted its head, ears pricking forward. He shifted one massive hoof, then another, turning not toward the trees but deeper into the misted water where moon and mud meet. Each step was slow, soundless. He paused once, brief, deliberate, letting me trace his outline one final time, branding it behind my eyes. Then the fog swallowed him whole. Silence rushed in, thick enough to taste. I realized my fists were clenched around nothing. I opened them and they shook. Tears, quiet, unannounced, slid down to the corners of my mouth. I breathed marsh air laced with gratitude and felt it steady the tremor. Those words settled on the water like oil, widening until they touched every dock, every kayak, every crawfish pot strung through my memory. My life before this moment suddenly looked paper thin. Every sunrise after felt thick enough to hold. When the fog thinned and morning painted the cattails gold, I rose. The bank looked ordinary again. Mud, water, footprints already filling with seepage. Yet something bright pulsed in the middle of that plain scene, invisible to any camera. Cord. A bond. Call it grace, call it debt, call it whatever lets you sleep. I call it proof that wild things carry hearts big enough to lend us beats when our own sputter. Back in town, I still hear chuckles when the story surfaces. That's fine. A miracle doesn't mind being doubted. It just minds being forgotten. I keep telling it, because every retelling lays one more plank between men and the pitying ignorance we mistake for knowledge. Now and then strangers drive out, curious, hopeful. They ask where it happened. I guide them to the bank, bid them hush, let the marsh speak or stay silent. Some leave disappointed. Others leave quiet, eyes softer, as though they heard a faint breath just beyond hearing. Me, I'll keep carrying my thermos and sitting at water's edge till my legs quit. Not waiting for another rescue, just honoring the first. And if one dawn a familiar silhouette rises again in the fog, I'll nod, the way old friends nod when words are too small. Because once you've seen mercy wearing bristles, every ripple of the bayou feels like a heartbeat you didn't know the world could spare.
When the bear sat down next to me in the mountains, my breath caught in my throat, because I knew this wasn't a mistake. I wasn't some tourist stumbling into trouble. I've been a shepherd most of my life. These mountains raised me. I know every ridge, every wind, and I know bears, not personally, of course, but enough to respect them. They keep their distance. You keep yours. That's the rule. That morning felt like any other. The sky was pale gray, the kind that promises either rain or secrets. My sheep grazed along the slope, bells clinking like quiet prayers. I was sitting on a flat rock, drinking the last sip of lukewarm tea from my tin mug, when I noticed something in the dirt. Tracks. Big ones. Fresh. Bear tracks don't scare me anymore. You see them now and then, and life goes on. I remember thinking, probably passed through last night. I didn't even tell the dogs. I just sat there, letting the silence hum in my ears. But then the silence broke. It wasn't a twig snap. It was heavier, like someone shifting weight on the earth itself. I froze. My first thought was wolf, but wolves don't sound like that. I turned my head slowly, and there he was, a bear, a massive brown wall of fur and muscle, no more than 10 steps away. I swear, time cracked in half. Everything in me screamed move, but I couldn't. My legs went dead, my heart started punching my ribs. The dogs? Gone. They'd vanished like smoke. Just me, the sheep, and this king. He didn't charge, didn't growl, didn't even look hungry. He just walked, calm, deliberate, and then sat down, right next to me. I could feel the heat coming off him, like standing too close to a fire. My throat locked up. My mind spun with every story I'd ever heard. Bears rip people apart. They break bones like twigs. They don't sit for tea. And yet here he was, sitting, looking at me. Those eyes, God, those eyes, dark, steady, almost human in their stillness. No anger, no hunger, just presence. Like he'd been walking for 1,000 miles and finally found what he was looking for. I didn't breathe. My hand still clutched the empty mug, as if that thin piece of metal could save me. He turned his head slightly, slow as a priest lifting a chalice, and stared straight into me. Not at me, into me. I can't explain what that felt like. Fear, yes, the raw animal kind that drills through your bones. But there was something else under it, something that shouldn't be there. A calm, like if he wanted me dead, I'd be dead already. Like I wasn't prey, like he knew something I didn't. The sheep sensed him, started shuffling higher up the slope. Their bells trembled in the air, but he didn't flinch, didn't glance at them. His entire focus was on me, as if I mattered more than a whole flock of easy meat. And in that moment, a thought cut through the panic. Why? Why me? I tried to swallow, but my throat was sandpaper. My brain scrambled for rules. Don't run. Don't make eye contact. Don't... What? What do you do when a bear sits next to you like a neighbor on a park bench? Seconds stretched like wire. I waited for a move, for a sign, for anything that made sense. A growl, a lunge, a swipe of those claws that could unbutton me from skull to spine. Nothing. Just stillness. I swear I could hear my own blood. Finally, I whispered to myself, barely a breath, if I don't move, he'll leave. That was the plan. Stay still. Let him get bored. Let him walk away. But I was wrong. The bear moved first. Slowly, like a shadow deciding where to fall, he turned his head toward the mountains, then back to me. That stare pinned me harder than claws ever could. His breath rolled out in a long, steaming ribbon, hanging in the cold morning air. Then, without a sound, he stood. I've seen bears stand before, in books, in pictures, but nothing prepares you for the real thing. It's like watching a tree pull its roots from the earth. He rose up, shoulders rippling like earth shifting under snow, and for a second, I thought this was it. My last breath, my last heartbeat. But he didn't attack. He just stood there, towering over me, then dropped back on all fours and started walking. Away. Not fast, not in a panic, just a heavy, deliberate pace. He took maybe 10 steps up a narrow path, then stopped. And here's the part that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. He looked back, right at me. It wasn't random. It wasn't chance. His head turned slow, deliberate, and those eyes, they found me, held me, like a question I couldn't answer. I sat frozen on that rock, heart pounding so hard it made the tin mug rattle in my hand. For a moment, I thought, this is good. He's leaving. It's over. Relief rushed through me like a flood breaking a dam. I thought that was the end of it. God, how wrong I was. Because the way he looked, it didn't feel like goodbye. It felt like an invitation. Almost like he was saying, "Come." I laughed under my breath, a broken, terrified sound. My voice cracked when I whispered, "What do you want from me?" He didn't answer, of course, just turned back toward the mountains and took a few more steps, then stopped again, looked back again. My stomach twisted. I didn't move. My whole life has been about rules, for sheep, for dogs, for weather, for predators, and one rule has kept me breathing. You never, ever follow a bear. But this wasn't a rule I knew. This was something else, something I didn't have a name for. My sheep had scattered farther up the slope. Their bells clanged sharp in the thin air, nervous, urgent. They wanted no part of this, and maybe they were right. Maybe I should have stayed put, let the bear go, pretend this never happened. But then he stopped for the third time, turned his massive head over that hulking shoulder and fixed those dark eyes on me like he was waiting. I don't know why, but my chest tightened. My mind was screaming, "Run!" My legs, they didn't listen. They just stood me up. The air burned cold in my lungs as I took a step forward, then another, each one heavier than the last. My boots scraped the dirt, loud as thunder in that silence. And the strangest thing? He didn't move, didn't growl, didn't even twitch. He just watched, steady as a mountain, until I came close enough to hear his breath again. Then, and I swear this happened, he turned and started walking. Slow, measured, like he knew I was behind him, like he wanted me there. Every instinct screamed, "You're insane. You're walking into your own grave." But something else, something deep, something I can't explain, pushed me on. We climbed a narrow trail that cut between two ridges, where the wind carried the smell of pine and stone and something wilder than both. My palms were slick, my heartbeat wouldn't slow. My ears strained for the sound of anything else, wolves, another bear, anything. But it was just him and me. And then, just as suddenly as he started, he stopped, dead still. The muscles under his fur tensed like a bowstring. I froze too. He turned his head toward me again, this time closer than ever. I could see the scars along his muzzle, the frost clinging to the tips of his fur, the black pools of his eyes. And then, he did something that cracked my soul open. He stepped toward me, one heavy paw, then another, slow enough for my heart to measure every beat. Then his massive head swung down and nudged me. Not hard, not violent, just a firm, almost gentle push against my thigh, like a dog might do when it wants attention. I stumbled, breath tearing out of me, every muscle screaming to run, and yet I didn't. I just stood there, knees shaking, staring into those eyes, wondering what in God's name was happening. Because in that touch, in that silent press of fur and bone and warmth, there was no threat, no hunger, just purpose. And for the first time in my life, I felt something I never thought I'd feel standing in front of a bear. Trust. The bear didn't wait after that nudge. He just turned and started walking, slow but sure, like a path had already been chosen. And God help me, I followed. Not because I was brave, not because I'm stupid, but because something in that moment, in that touch, broke the old rules, the ones I'd lived by my whole life. My boots crunched against loose rock as we climbed. The air grew colder, thinner, like even the sky was holding its breath. Pines closed in around us, tall and dark, their needles whispering secrets I didn't want to know. I kept glancing back. My flock was gone, nothing but bells fading into distance. The dogs vanished. My whole world was behind me, and ahead, only him, this mountain giant who could kill me in one swipe, but hadn't. Every instinct in me screamed turn back. Every story I'd ever heard said no man walks into a bear's shadow and lives to tell it. And yet, step by step, I kept going, The trail narrowed, hugging a cliff on one side, dropping into a black void on the other. My heart slammed against my ribs. Sweat stung my eyes even in the cold. I told myself, if he wanted me dead, I'd be dead already. That thought stuck like a nail in my mind, over and over. If he wanted to kill me, why this? Why lead me here? The bear didn't hurry. He didn't even look back this time, just lumbered forward with the weight of something ancient in his stride, like he was following a law I couldn't see. We pushed deeper into the gorge, where the sun barely touched the ground. Rocks loomed like broken teeth. The air smelled of stone and shadow. My breath fogged in front of me, ragged and loud in the silence. Then he stopped. No warning. Just froze mid-step, head lifting, ears twitching. The sudden stillness hit me like a fist. I nearly tripped trying not to make a sound. He turned his head slightly, nose to the wind, and then it happened. A sound rolled out of him. Not a growl, not a roar. Something deeper, lower. A sound that crawled into my bones and stayed there. It was a call, long and guttural, like the earth itself was speaking through his chest. It made the rocks hum, made my lungs clamp shut. I froze. What else was in there? Because that's what it felt like. A message sent to something unseen, something waiting in the dark beyond that bend in the gorge. Every hair on my neck stood up. My brain fired pictures I didn't want. Another bear, bigger than him, crouched in the shadows. Wolves, a mountain lion, death, wearing fur and teeth. I could feel the sweat trickle down my spine as his call faded into silence. A silence so sharp, it felt alive. I braced myself, fists clenched, ready for an avalanche of fur and rage, ready for my body to hit the rocks and never rise again. Seconds stretched, 10, 20, 30, nothing. Then, a sound came back, but it wasn't a growl. It wasn't even close. It was high, thin, fragile, a cry, so faint it barely touched the air, like the voice of something small, something helpless, and it wasn't an animal sound. Not the way I know animal sounds. It sounded wrong, human, almost. A sob choked by distance and fear. My heart jerked sideways. My breath shattered in my throat. No, that's not possible. The bear's head lifted higher, ears sharp, listening. Then, without looking back at me, he started moving again. Faster this time, a low urgency in his steps, stones scattering under his weight. And me? I followed. I couldn't stop if I tried. That cry had burned itself into me like fire on skin. Because in that single sound, every fear I had broke into something else, something worse, something heavier than any bear's shadow. What in God's name was waiting for us up there? That sound wouldn't leave my head. Thin, sharp, almost like a child crying through a wall of stone. I blinked hard, trying to shake it out. Maybe it was the wind, twisted through the cliffs. Maybe I was losing my mind. God knows fear can make you hear things. But the bear heard it too. I saw it in the way his ears twitched, the way his whole body shifted forward, tense with purpose. Then he moved, faster now, claws scraping rock, shoulders rippling under that heavy fur like rolling earth. And I followed. God help me, I followed. Every step felt like a choice between sense and madness. My boots skidded on scree, heart battering my ribs, lungs slicing cold air into shards. That cry came again, faint, desperate, like something calling from the edge of the world. What is that? What is that? The gorge narrowed to a knife edge, jagged cliffs rising like broken walls. The bear threaded through as if he'd walked this path 1,000 times. I stumbled behind, grabbing roots, scraping palms raw. The sound grew clearer, higher now, frantic, beating against the silence. And then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a pale shape clinging to the gray. But then it moved, a small body wedged on a sliver of rock, trembling so hard it shook dust into the abyss below. A goat. A young one, no bigger than a lamb. My stomach flipped. My mind roared, no, no, this can't be. But it was. I knew that goat, knew the curve of those horns, the patch of white on its side. It was mine. One I'd lost days ago when the fog rolled in thick and I thought a wolf had taken it. I'd mourned it, buried it in my head, and now here it was, alive, teetering over death. The bear stopped just shy of the drop, massive shoulders hunched, staring down at that tiny scrap of life. Then, and I swear this will follow me to my grave, he turned his head and looked at me, not a glance, not a flicker, a look, deep, heavy, and in that look was a message so clear it slammed through me like thunder. Help him. I don't know how I moved. My legs were water, my hands shaking like leaves, but somehow I edged past the bear, knees scraping rock, breath burning. The ledge was a cruel joke, barely wide enough for my boots. One wrong move, and I'd join the nothing below. The goat bleated weakly, eyes rolling white, hooves scraping for grip. Easy, easy boy, I whispered, voice cracking, though I don't know if it was for him or me. I flattened against the cliff, fingers clawing for holds, heart pounding so loud I couldn't hear anything else. One more step, then another. The drop yawned black beneath me. When I reached him, he jerked back in terror, nearly pitching off the edge. My gut turned to ice. I pressed closer, murmuring nonsense, soft as prayer. My hands closed around his small, shaking body, and I felt his ribs flutter like a bird's wings. With every ounce of strength, I pulled him in, cradling that fragile life against my chest. My boots slid, gravel skittering into the void, but I held on. God help me, I held on. When I crawled back to solid ground, my knees buckled. I just sat there, clutching that goat like a lost child, breath tearing in and out. I looked up at the bear. He was still there, still watching. For a moment, the world stopped. Just me, the goat trembling in my arms, and that giant standing like a mountain come alive. His eyes met mine, and something in me broke wide open, because in those dark pools, I didn't see hunger, didn't see instinct. I saw recognition, gratitude. The weight of that nearly crushed me more than the climb. I whispered, voice barely a breath, "You knew." And for the first time, I believed it. Relief slammed through me like a wave. I'd saved the goat. The danger was past. The nightmare was over. I thought that was the end of it. But then, the bear moved, slow, purposeful, toward me. And what he did next shattered everything I thought I knew about this world. The goat was still trembling in my arms when the bear stepped closer. I stiffened, every muscle screaming to run, but I didn't move. Couldn't. My hands gripped that small body like it was the only thing tethering me to this world. The bear lowered his head, slowly. So slow it felt like the mountains themselves were holding their breath. Then his nose touched the goat. Just a whisper of a touch, gentle, careful, like he was afraid to break it. His breath rolled warm against the little one's fur, and for a second, the goat stilled, as if even it understood this wasn't harm. I sat frozen, watching something I knew shouldn't exist, watching a predator touch prey like kin. Then he lifted his head and looked at me. Not a glance, not a flicker, a look that split me open from the inside, deep, steady, heavy as stone. And in that look, I swear to you, I saw something I can't explain. Gratitude. It wasn't human, it wasn't animal, it was older than both, something carved out of the earth before words were born. My throat locked, my eyes burned. I heard my own voice crack in a whisper. You knew. Because he had. Somehow, some way, he knew that goat was mine. He knew what it meant to me. He'd brought me here not for him, but for me. I thought about every story I'd ever heard. Bears raiding flocks, snatching kids, leaving nothing but blood and silence. That's what nature does. That's the law. But this bear, he broke that law like it was nothing, and in breaking it, he broke me too. For a moment, The world tilted. I wasn't sitting on a cliff with a wild beast anymore. I was standing on the edge of something bigger, something I'd never touched before. The goat shifted against my chest, bleated soft like a tired child. That sound yanked me back, and for the first time since this began, I thought, it's over. The danger's done. He'll leave now. This miracle is finished. I was wrong, because instead of turning away, the bear stepped closer. His shadow fell over me like dusk. My heart slammed hard enough to crack ribs. And then, God help me, his head dipped low, and he pressed it against me, against my hand. That massive skull, heavy with bone and muscle, nudged my fingers with a touch so startlingly tender, it stole the breath from my lungs. I froze, my whole body locked like ice, except my hand. It moved, slowly, without thought, without permission. My fingers slid through the coarse fur at his crown, warm and thick, tangled with bits of pine. And in that instant, I felt everything. The wildness, the weight, the raw, breathing truth of a life that owed me nothing, and yet trusted me anyway. Tears hit my face before I knew they'd come, hot in the cold air. I didn't even wipe them. Couldn't. My vision blurred as that great head lingered against my hand for one endless heartbeat, then lifted. He turned then. No hurry, no fear. Just a slow, deliberate walk toward the mouth of the gorge, paws whispering against stone. I sat there, shaking, clutching the goat, watching him go. Halfway to the bend, he stopped and looked back. That look, God, that look will haunt me forever, because it wasn't just a glance. It was a closing door and an open wound. A farewell, yes, but more than that, a knowing, like he'd written something on my soul and wanted to make sure I'd never erase it. And then he was gone. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything I couldn't name, everything I'd seen and shouldn't have. I sat there a long time, holding that goat, staring at the place where a bear had stood and broken the world I thought I knew. I don't remember the climb back down. 1 minute I was staring at the empty mouth of that gorge, my hand still burning from where his head had pressed against it. The next, I was stumbling down the slope, clutching the goat like a lifeline. My legs shook so hard I thought they'd snap. My breath tore in and out, ragged and sharp, each step pounding the truth deeper into me. This happened. This really happened. When I saw the flock, my throat closed. The dogs barked wild, circling like they'd found a ghost. Maybe they had. I dropped to my knees and set the goat down, and it stumbled into the herd with a bleat so small, so thin, like a thread pulling me back to the world I knew. Except, that world didn't fit anymore. By the time I reached the others, the sun had slid down the sky, bleeding gold into the peaks. The men were standing by the fire, talking low, voices rough with smoke and wind. When they saw me, they stared like they'd seen the dead walk, and when they saw what I carried, the stares turned to disbelief. "Where the hell did you find him?" one asked, eyes sharp under his hat brim. I opened my mouth, and nothing came out at first. My throat was dry, scraped raw from silence and fear, and something bigger than both. Finally, I whispered, "A bear." They laughed, hard and loud, like my words were a joke to warm their hands on. "Sure," one said, slapping his knee. "A bear brought him back, eh? Maybe he packed him in his lunchbox too." Another spat in the dirt, grinning. "You're lucky that thing didn't take your head clean off." I didn't laugh. Couldn't. I just stood there, clutching my arms tight to keep the shiver in. Finally, I said, quiet but sharp, "It wasn't luck." They stopped laughing then, not because they believed me, but because of the way I said it, like a man standing on the edge of something they couldn't see. One of them frowned. "What are you talking about?" I didn't answer right away. My eyes slid past them, past the fire, past the sheep huddled close against the wind, to the mountains rising black against the bruised sky. Somewhere out there, he was walking away, the one who broke the rules, the one who changed mine. "Why me?" I whispered, mostly to myself. "Why would a bear do that?" No one spoke. The fire popped. Sparks jumped like startled stars. Then one of the men nudged me with his boot. "Come on, tell it straight. You saw tracks, didn't you?" Tracks. The word hit me like a shove. I turned, scanning the ground, and there they were. Deep prints pressed into the earth, big as plates, leading right up to where I'd come from. The men followed my stare. One whistled low. "Son of a," he muttered. "You weren't lying." The laughter died for good then. They didn't mock me anymore, didn't smile. They just stared at those tracks like they were doorways to something they didn't want to open. Finally, the oldest of them, a man with eyes like old wood, said, "You were lucky." I looked at him, looked hard, and for the first time, I said it out loud. It wasn't luck. It was something else. I didn't tell them about the look in his eyes. I couldn't. They wouldn't understand. Hell, I didn't understand. But I knew this much. I saw in his eyes more humanity than in some people I know. The words tasted strange, like they didn't belong in this world. But they were true. Every syllable. The men said nothing after that. They just went back to the fire, quiet now, like the wind had stolen their tongues. Me? I sat apart, staring into the dark where the mountains swallowed the day. My hands still smelled of his fur, sharp and wild and real. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something in me had been rewritten on that cliff. The mountains felt different after that day, or maybe it was me. I tried to go back to normal, to long hours on the slope, the cold bite of wind, the rhythm of bells. But every sound, every shadow made my chest ache like a bruise I couldn't touch. Nights were the worst. I'd sit by the fire, staring into the glow, and the pictures would come. His head pressed against my hand, that look in his eyes, heavy with something I didn't have a name for, over and over, like a song stuck on a single note. I didn't tell the men more than they already knew. What could I say? That a bear led me to a goat I'd given up for dead? That he touched me like a friend, not a beast? They'd laugh, or worse, they'd believe me, and I wasn't ready for either, so I carried it alone. And the strangest thing, it didn't feel heavy. It felt clean, like the air after rain. Days passed. The world kept turning, but I didn't. Not in the same way. I started noticing things. The way my flock pressed close against the wind. The way the dogs waited for my voice before they ran. And my voice changed. Softer. Not the hard bark I used to throw like stones. Because I realized something. Words can wound. You don't need teeth for that. You don't need claws. But a gesture, a simple, silent gesture, can heal more than you'll ever know. That bear never spoke a word, but what he said in that moment, it rewrote the map inside me. I stopped snapping at the dogs, stopped cursing the stubborn ram that always broke line. I even stopped hating the cold so much. Life felt wider, like there was a door I hadn't seen before, and now it was open, just a crack, enough to let something holy slip through. I thought about him every dawn, wondered where he was, what ridge carried his weight that day. I told myself I'd never see him again, that it was a single miracle, one flicker of lightning that never strikes twice. I believed that, until the morning I didn't. It was early, the kind of early that makes the sky feel unfinished. Mist draped the slopes like torn cloth. The flock stirred slow, hooves crunching frost. I was scanning the ridge for strays when I saw it. A shadow, tall, still, cut sharp against the paling sky. My breath locked. I knew that shape. I'd know it if I were blind. The bear. He stood there, far off, a dark monument in the mist. He didn't move, didn't need to, just stood, looking down at me across the gulf of stone and silence. I don't know how long we held that line, him on his throne of rock, me rooted to the earth below. My chest hurt, my hands shook, and then, He turned. Slow as dusk, he slipped into the fog, and the ridge swallowed him whole. I never saw him again. But that moment, that shadow, that stillness, stitched itself into me, a thread I'll carry to the grave. If someone told me this story, I'd call them a liar. I'd laugh, shake my head, spit in the dirt, and say, "You've been drinking." But this isn't a story I heard. It's a story I lived. And some nights, when the wind slides through these mountains like a ghost, I still wonder if I dreamed it all. But then I remember the weight of his head against my hand, the heat of his breath on my skin, the smell of fir and pine. You can't dream that real. So I swear on my life, on every stone of these hills. It happened. I saw it. I felt it. And it broke me in ways I didn't know a man could break. Because that bear taught me something no human ever could. Nature doesn't need words. And sometimes, silence hits harder than fists. People fight with their mouths more than their hands. They tear each other apart with sharp tongues and cold eyes. I've seen men spit words like bullets, and I've seen what they do to a soul. But a bear, a wild thing that owes you nothing. He spoke louder with one gesture than all the sermons I ever sat through. When he pressed his head against me, it wasn't power, it wasn't threat, it was trust. And that trust, it carved me open, made me softer in a way I didn't know I needed. I keep thinking, why me? Why not some hunter, some hiker, some other soul? Maybe there's no reason. Maybe there's every reason. Maybe nature doesn't waste her miracles. I don't tell this story to most folks. They wouldn't understand. Hell, half the time, I don't either. All I know is this. When I lay down at night and close my eyes, I don't see his teeth. I don't see his claws. I see his eyes. And in those eyes, black as river stones, deep as old earth, I saw something that made me feel small and holy all at once. Something that said, "You're part of this. Don't forget it, so I won't. Not ever." If you're listening to this and your heart's beating hard right now, if your throat feels tight and your skin's alive with something you can't name, you understand. Because this isn't just my story. It's ours. A reminder that the world still holds secrets sharp enough to cut you open and gentle enough to stitch you whole again. And if you don't believe me, I get it. God knows, some mornings, I don't believe it either. But I'll tell you this. If you ever find yourself on a high ridge with only wind and silence for company, look hard at the shadows. You might find out the world isn't as wild as you think. Or maybe it's wilder than you'll ever understand. If your heart skipped a beat just now, you understand. Subscribe. Here, we share true stories nature doesn't want you to forget. If you believe animals remember kindness, right, nature speaks without words.